Welcome back to Erupts. Before we dive into volcanic disasters of the modern era, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you never miss an eruption update. If you love learning about the raw power of our planet, you're in the right place. On September 27, 2014, Mount Ontake, Japan's second highest volcano, erupted without warning at 11:52 a.m., killing 63 hikers in what would become the deadliest volcanic disaster in Japan's modern history. The eruption occurred on a clear autumn Saturday, when hundreds of climbers had ascended the sacred peak to witness the changing fall colors and enjoy what meteorologists had predicted would be perfect hiking weather. But how exactly did a volcano that had shown minimal signs of unrest suddenly explode with such devastating force that it buried an entire mountainside in ash and rock within minutes? And why did the monitoring systems that were supposed to protect these climbers fail to detect the danger brewing beneath their feet? Watch closely because Mount Ontake's eruption revealed a terrifying truth about a type of volcanic event that scientists still struggle to predict, one that could strike again at any of the world's popular hiking destinations without giving anyone time to escape. September 27, 2014. The morning broke over Mount Ontake with cloudless skies and temperatures hovering around 50 degrees Fahrenheit at the summit. For the hundreds of hikers making their way up the mountain's well-maintained trails, conditions couldn't have been better. Mount Ontake, standing at 10,062 feet, is one of Japan's most sacred mountains, revered in the Shinto religion, and visited by thousands of pilgrims and tourists every year. The weekend timing, combined with the spectacular autumn foliage season known as Koyo, had drawn an unusually large crowd. Families, experienced mountaineers, photographers, and casual hikers alike filled the trails leading to the summit crater. Many planned to eat lunch at the peak, take photographs of the volcanic landscape, and descend before nightfall. The Japan Meteorological Agency had issued no warnings. There were no evacuation orders, no restricted access zones, and no alerts suggesting anything unusual was happening beneath the mountain. The volcano's last significant eruption had occurred in 1935 years earlier, and while small steam vents occasionally released gases near the summit, these were considered normal for an active volcano. Seismic monitoring stations positioned around Mount Ontake had detected a slight increase in volcanic tremors in the weeks leading up to September 1. But the signals were weak, inconsistent, and fell well below the threshold that would typically trigger an official alert. On paper, Mount Ontake appeared stable. In reality, the mountain was about to detonate. At precisely 11:52 a.m., as dozens of hikers rested near the summit crater enjoying their lunches and taking photographs, Mount Ontake erupted with catastrophic violence. The explosion occurred without the gradual buildup of tremors, ground deformation, or gas emissions that usually precede major volcanic events. Instead, the eruption began as a sudden phreatic explosion, a steam-driven blast caused when groundwater came into contact with magma or superheated rock deep beneath the surface. The water instantly vaporized, creating immense pressure that shattered the rock cap sealing the volcano's conduits. Within seconds, a massive column of ash, steam, and volcanic debris rocketed skyward from multiple vents near the summit. The eruption cloud rose thousands of feet into the air, turning the bright afternoon sky pitch black. Hikers who were standing near the crater rim had no time to react. One moment they were admiring the view, the next they were engulfed in a superheated cloud of ash and rock fragments traveling at hurricane-force speeds. Video footage captured by survivors shows the terrifying moment the eruption began. In one clip, a group of hikers can be heard laughing and chatting as they film the summit landscape. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling sound emerges from beneath their feet. Someone shouts in confusion. Then the camera shakes violently as a towering black cloud erupts from the crater just meters away. Screams fill the audio as people scramble to run, but within seconds, the ash cloud overtakes them, plunging everything into complete darkness. Another video, recorded from a lower elevation on the trail, shows the eruption column rising like a nuclear mushroom cloud, expanding outward as it climbs. Hikers in the foreground can be seen frozen in shock, unsure whether to run downhill or seek shelter. Then the pyroclastic surge, a ground-hugging avalanche of hot gas, ash, and rock, begins racing down the mountain slopes toward them. the initial blast, ejected rocks ranging in size from pebbles to boulders weighing several hundred pounds. These volcanic bombs rained down across the summit area with lethal velocity, striking hikers who were desperately trying to flee or find cover. Many were killed instantly by head trauma. Others were buried under thick layers of volcanic ash that accumulated at a rate of several inches per minute. The temperature within the ash cloud reached approximately 176 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cause severe burns but not high enough to incinerate everything in its path, like the pyroclastic flows from magmatic eruptions. This unusual characteristic of phreatic eruptions would later complicate rescue efforts, as it meant some victims survived the initial blast only to become trapped, injured, and unreachable. As the eruption intensified, the summit area transformed into a nightmarish survival zone. Visibility dropped to zero as thick ash filled the air, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The ash wasn't just falling from above, it was being driven horizontally by powerful volcanic winds, stinging exposed skin and making breathing nearly impossible without protection. Hikers who had been scattered across different parts of the summit now faced a critical decision: attempt to descend through the blinding ash storm or seek shelter in one of the mountain huts located near the crater. Those who chose to run downhill found themselves disoriented within minutes. The trails, which had been clearly marked just moments before, were now completely obscured. Some hikers became separated from their groups, wandering in circles as the ash continued to accumulate. Others fell into volcanic fissures or were struck by falling rocks as they stumbled blindly through the chaos. The hikers, who reached the mountain shelters, faced a different nightmare. Mount Ontake has several small huts and rest facilities near the summit, designed to provide basic protection from weather. During the eruption, these structures became crowded with dozens of terrified people seeking refuge. Video recorded inside one of these shelters shows the horrifying conditions. The walls shake continuously from ongoing volcanic tremors. Ash pours through gaps in the roof and walls, filling the interior with a choking gray fog. People crouch on the floor, covering their faces with jackets, towels, and anything else they can find to filter the air. Some are crying. Others are silent, too shocked to speak. Outside, the roar of the eruption is deafening, punctuated by the sharp cracks of rocks slamming into the shelter's exterior. One man can be heard saying a prayer. Another checks his phone repeatedly, trying to get a signal to call for help, but the ash cloud has disrupted all cellular communication. Those trapped in the shelters had no way of knowing how long the eruption would last or whether the buildings would hold. Phreatic eruptions are notoriously unpredictable in duration. Some last only minutes, others can continue intermittently for hours or even days. As time passed, the air inside the shelters became increasingly toxic. Volcanic gases, including sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide, seeped into the structures, causing dizziness, nausea, and difficulty breathing. Several people collapsed from gas exposure. Others suffering from injuries sustained during the initial blast began to deteriorate without medical care. Meanwhile, just outside the shelter walls, bodies lay buried beneath the ash. The lucky ones had died instantly. The unlucky remained conscious, trapped under the weight of volcanic debris, unable to move or call for help, as rescue remained impossibly out of reach. At 11:53 a.m., just 1 minute after the eruption began, seismic monitoring stations around Mount Ontake registered violent tremors, and the Japan Meteorological Agency immediately raised the volcanic alert level from 1 to 3, indicating an eruption in progress and restricting access to the mountain. But for the hundreds of hikers already on the slopes, this alert came far too late. Emergency services in the surrounding municipalities of Kiso and Otaki received the first distress calls within minutes of the eruption. Survivors who had managed to descend below the ash cloud used their mobile phones to report the disaster, describing scenes of chaos, injured climbers, and people trapped near the summit. Local fire departments, police units, and the Japan Self-Defense Forces immediately began mobilizing rescue teams, but they faced an unprecedented challenge. The eruption was still ongoing, making it impossible to safely reach the affected areas. Helicopter reconnaissance flights launched from nearby air bases within the first hour attempted to assess the situation from above. The footage they captured was devastating. The entire summit area, covering approximately 1 square mile, was blanketed in gray ash several feet deep. Volcanic debris had transformed the familiar landscape into an alien wasteland. The helicopters could see hikers moving slowly through the ash at lower elevations, many of them injured and disoriented, but the thick ash clouds still billowing from the crater made it impossible to land or deploy rescue personnel. Pilots reported visibility near zero above 9,000 feet. Some attempted to descend closer to evacuate stranded hikers, but were forced to turn back when ash began clogging their engines and reducing rotor efficiency to dangerous levels. One helicopter suffered a near-catastrophic engine failure and had to make an emergency landing at a lower elevation, briefly stranding its crew. On the ground, rescue teams assembled at the mountain's base, preparing to ascend on foot once conditions permitted. Firefighters donned specialized protective gear, including gas masks and heat-resistant suits, while medical teams set up triage stations to treat survivors as they descended. Police established checkpoints to prevent civilians from attempting unauthorized rescue missions. By early afternoon, the first survivors began staggering down the mountain trails, many of them covered head to toe in gray ash, coughing violently and suffering from burns, lacerations, and smoke inhalation. Emergency medical personnel treated them immediately, administering oxygen, flushing ash from their eyes and airways, and transporting the most critically injured to hospitals by ambulance. These survivors provided the first eyewitness accounts of what had happened at the summit, describing the sudden explosion, the deadly rain of rocks, and the people they had left behind, either dead or too injured to move. Their testimonies made one thing horrifyingly clear: dozens of people remained trapped on the mountain and time was running out. By late afternoon on September 27th, the eruption had subsided enough for ground-based rescue teams to begin their ascent, but the mission remained extraordinarily dangerous. Volcanic tremors continued to shake the mountain, and the Japan Meteorological Agency warned that additional phreatic explosions could occur at any moment. Despite these risks, more than 200 personnel from the Japan Self-Defense Forces, police, and fire departments began climbing toward the summit, carrying stretchers, medical supplies, oxygen tanks, and communications equipment. The rescuers moved slowly, hampered by ash deposits that in some areas reached knee-deep. The fine volcanic particles made every step exhausting, and the material's tendency to compact and shift created treacherous footing. Rescuers had to rope themselves together to avoid becoming separated in areas where visibility remained poor due to lingering ash clouds and steam vents that had opened across the mountain's upper slopes. As the teams reached higher elevations, they began encountering casualties. The first bodies were found along the main trails, partially buried in ash. Some victims had clearly been struck by volcanic bombs. Others appeared to have been overcome by toxic gases or heat exposure. Rescue personnel marked the locations with GPS coordinates and flags but were forced to leave the bodies in place, prioritizing the search for survivors. The summit area presented an even grimmer scene. Inside and around the mountain shelters, rescuers found dozens of people who had died from a combination of trauma, asphyxiation, and exposure. Many were huddled together, having sought protection in the groups. Some had used clothing or backpacks to shield their faces from the ash. A few had written final messages on their phones or in notebooks, saying goodbye to loved ones they believed they would never see again. The rescue operation was further complicated by deteriorating weather conditions. As evening approached, temperatures on the mountain dropped rapidly and fog began rolling in, reducing visibility to just a few meters. Rescuers worked by flashlight and headlamp, calling out repeatedly in hopes of finding survivors, but by nightfall, the decision was made to halt operations until morning. Leaving people on the mountain overnight was agonizing for everyone involved, but attempting a nighttime rescue in near-zero visibility on unstable volcanic terrain would have resulted in additional casualties among the rescue teams themselves. The survivors who had reached the shelters were supplied with emergency blankets, food, water, and radios, and told to remain inside until first light. Throughout the night, volcanic tremors continued, reminding everyone that Mount Ontake was far from finished. As rescuers descended to base camps to rest and regroup, they knew that the next day would bring the grim task of recovering the dead from one of Japan's most sacred mountains, now transformed into a mass grave. In the days following the disaster, as the death toll climbed to 63 with an additional 6 people missing and presumed dead, investigators began examining a critical question. Why had Japan's sophisticated volcanic monitoring network failed to detect the imminent eruption? Japan is one of the most volcanically active countries on Earth, with 111 active volcanoes, and has invested heavily in monitoring systems designed to provide early warnings and save lives. Mount Ontake itself was equipped with multiple seismic sensors, GPS stations to detect ground deformation, and tilt meters to measure changes in the mountain's shape caused by rising magma. Yet none of these instruments provided sufficient warning to prevent the tragedy. The answer lies in the unique nature of phreatic eruptions, volcanic events that remain among the most difficult to predict in modern volcanology. Unlike magmatic eruptions, which are caused by molten rock rising from deep within the earth and typically produce clear warning signs weeks or months in advance, phreatic eruptions are driven by the sudden interaction between water and heat near the surface. When groundwater seeps into hot rock or encounters pockets of magma at shallow depths, it can flash into steam almost instantaneously. The resulting pressure buildup can fracture rock and trigger explosive eruptions with little to no precursory activity. The seismic signals generated by phreatic eruptions are often weak, short-lived, and difficult to distinguish from normal background volcanic tremors. In Mount Ontake's case, monitoring stations did detect an increase in seismic activity starting about 2 weeks before the eruption. Between September 10th and 11th, the network recorded approximately 80 small volcanic earthquakes. However, these tremors were low in magnitude, none exceeding 1.0 on the Richter scale, and they ceased after September 11th, leading scientists to believe the activity was not a precursor to an imminent eruption. Japan Meteorological Agency officials later acknowledged that the signals had been ambiguous and that current technology cannot reliably predict phreatic eruptions. The agency's alert system is designed to escalate warnings based on sustained increases in seismic activity, ground deformation, and volcanic gas emissions. But Mount Ontake showed none of these classic signs. There was no measurable inflation of the mountain's flanks, no dramatic increase in sulfur dioxide or carbon dioxide emissions, and no sustained earthquake swarms that would have justified raising the alert level before September 27th. This tragic limitation highlights a fundamental challenge in volcanic monitoring. Phreatic eruptions can occur at volcanoes that appear stable, at times when hiking and tourism are permitted, and without the gradual buildup that allows for evacuations. Mount Ontake became a case study in this danger, prompting Japan to overhaul its volcanic alert system and install additional monitoring equipment at high-risk mountains frequented by tourists. But the reality remains that some eruptions will always strike without warning. The recovery operation on Mount Ontake continued for weeks after the eruption, hampered by ongoing volcanic activity, dangerous terrain, and severe weather. By early October, rescuers had recovered 58 bodies from the summit area, but 5 victims remained missing, buried deep beneath layers of ash and rock that were too unstable to excavate safely. The identities of the deceased were slowly confirmed through dental records, personal belongings, and DNA analysis. The victims ranged in age from teenagers to elderly hikers in their 70s and included experienced mountaineers, casual tourists, and several guides who had been leading groups on the mountain. Families traveled to the base of Mount Ontake to hold vigils and pray for their loved ones, many of whom would never be brought down from the sacred peak. The Japanese government eventually suspended the search for the remaining victims, citing unacceptable risks to rescue personnel, and designated the areas where they lay as permanent memorials. In the aftermath of the disaster, Japan implemented significant changes to its volcanic monitoring and alert systems. The Japan Meteorological Agency established a new alert level specifically designed to warn of phreatic eruption risks even when magmatic activity is not detected. Additional seismic stations, gas monitoring equipment, and surveillance cameras were installed on Mount Ontake and 47 other volcanoes across the country deemed to pose similar risks. Local governments around active volcanoes were required to develop detailed evacuation plans, construct emergency shelters along popular hiking routes, and conduct regular disaster drills. Warning systems and real-time monitoring displays were installed at trailheads to inform hikers of current volcanic conditions. These reforms represented the most comprehensive overhaul of Japan's volcanic safety protocols in decades, driven by the recognition that the nation's mountainous landscape and hiking culture required better protection against sudden volcanic events. Mount Ontake itself was declared off-limits to the public immediately after the eruption, with access restricted to researchers and recovery teams. The mountain remained closed for nearly 2 years as scientists studied the eruption dynamics and worked to assess the ongoing risks. When limited access was finally restored in 2016, strict regulations were put in place, including mandatory registration for all hikers, exclusion zones around the crater, and real-time monitoring broadcasts that could trigger immediate evacuations if volcanic activity increased. Yet even with these precautions, many survivors and families of victims have called for the mountain to remain permanently closed to tourists, arguing that no monitoring system can guarantee safety against the kind of unpredictable explosion that struck on September 27, 2014. The debate continues today, reflecting a broader tension between Japan's cultural reverence for Tsurid, its volcanic mountains, and the deadly reality that these peaks can awaken without warning. The story of Mount Ontake's 2014 eruption serves as a sobering reminder that even in one of the world's most technologically advanced nations, with extensive monitoring networks and disaster preparedness systems, some volcanic events remain beyond our ability to predict. The 63 people who died on that autumn Saturday were not reckless adventurers ignoring warnings. They were ordinary people enjoying a beautiful day on a mountain that had been deemed safe. Their deaths exposed the limits of volcanic science and forced a global reckoning with the dangers posed by phreatic eruptions at popular tourist destinations. Today, Mount Ontake stands as both a sacred site and a warning, its ash-covered summit a testament to the awesome and terrifying power of the earth beneath our feet. What lessons do you think the world should take from this tragedy? Let us know in the comments below. Liked what you saw? Subscribe for more volcanic action, and I'll see you in the next eruption.